Hey guys, right, this is an additional video from the talks that I'm giving to my second year history of architecture class. I'm doing it as a separate one because it can also be used for other purposes besides history of architecture. But as I've been lecturing on church architecture and we're now going to look at Muslim mosque architecture, I thought I'd just give a rundown on the Abrahamic faiths. The first of these is the Jewish faith. Now, it all stems from Abraham. Who is Abraham? Abraham was born about 2000 BCE. Now, I'm going to use the modern terminology. Historically, it was before Christ and after Christ, or Anno Domini, which is the year of our Lord. Jesus isn't the Lord of everybody. So, modern way of saying is BCE, before the Christian era, and CE, Christian era. So I will use those terminologies. So Abraham was born about 2000 BCE in what we think is Iraq, and he was the father of the Jewish nation, and one of the most important people from that was Moses. Moses plays a very important part in the Jewish faith. Moses was born about 1390 BCE, and then Jesus, who was also a Jew, was descended from Abraham, was born about 0, or give or take 4 years, and Muhammad, also descended from Abraham, was born about 571 in the Christian era. So there's your timeline. Okay, so what's the Jewish faith? What do they believe? Well, they have their complete biblical work is called the Tanakh. That's Tanakh. That was compiled between 1200 to 165 BCE, before Christ. It's got, well, it depends on which way you look at it. You could say it's got 39 books in it, or 24 books. Some books have split up into 2. But it's a whole bunch of books. The initial 5 are the Pentateuch, which are very important. But there are poetry books like Psalms and prophetic books and a whole bunch of other major and minor prophets. There were about 30 authors, and it was all compiled until about 165 BCE. The New Testament is made up of 27 books, about 8 authors. It was compiled after Jesus' death between 30 and 1000 Christian era, or AD. And the Quran was written, well, it was revealed to Muhammad, between 610 and 632 Christian era, and then was compiled by scribes after his death between 644 and 656 Christian era. So, what's so important about these dudes? Well, what's interesting is that there are about 2.2 billion, that's 2,200 million Christians in the world, about 1.9 billion Muslims, that's 1,900 million Muslims. Jews make up a small percentage. They're like 0.02 billion, like 20 million. But if you look at the world population of 7 billion or whatever, we're looking at over half of the world's population here. So it's very large. And so how does it fit together? Well, what's interesting is all 3 faiths believe in God, the God of Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were. Let's talk a bit about Abraham's family, because they say a lot of the squabbles in the Middle East today are related to family feuds. Abraham, his first son was actually Ishmael, and Ishmael was his first son via his wife's maidservant, Haggai. So he was cast out when when Abraham's wife Sarah actually had a baby, and that was Isaac. Uh, he was cast out, but he was cared for, and the Muslims believe that Muhammad was descended from Abraham and Ishmael. Although they believe he comes from that line, they still venerate Isaac and Jacob as prophets. And the Christians also believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Um, what is interesting is that Isaac wasn't the firstborn, but neither was Jacob. Jacob had an older brother Esau, who was also cast. There was a long story there, but Esau went and married into the family of Ishmael. Now, many people believe that Esau and Ishmael were the father of the Arabs, but I've done a bit of research and it doesn't seem to be quite true, because they were saying the Ishmaelites were mentioned up until about 800 years before the Christian era, and the Arabs were mentioned as early as 1,000 years before the Christian era. So there's about 200 years when the Arabs and the Ishmaelites kind of existed separately, because Arabic and Jewish or the Hebrew language are two separate languages. So, but I think after that period they did amalgamate, because the Muslim faiths are mostly Arabic speaking, or from that Arabic speaking area in the Middle East, and they see themselves descending from Abraham and Ishmael. So what can we say about the three books? I'm speaking from a Christian perspective, but so I'm not going to quote the New Testament at all. I'm going to look at the Tanakh and the Quran a little bit, just for interest. The Tanakh, sometimes it's called a Mikra. Apparently, it has, like over 50 or 60 prophecies about the Jewish Messiah that was apparently fulfilled by Jesus. Now, if you want to look those up yourself, apparently the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. That's Micah 5 verse 2. That he will be from Galilee. That's Isaiah 9 verses 1 to 2. That he would do miracles. Isaiah 35 verses 5 and 6. That he would be the sacrificial lamb. There's a whole bunch of verses there, but one of the most interesting ones is Isaiah 53. If you read nothing else, just go read Isaiah 53. That's quite interesting. That he would enter Jerusalem on a donkey. Zechariah 9 verse 9. There's quite a lot in Psalm 22 about the crucifixion. If you want to read another very interesting psalm, a Bible verse, read that. There are all sorts of references to the crucifixion in Psalm 22. And finally, that he was pierced. Zechariah 12 verse 10. So if anybody wants to look at those on their own time, they're welcome to do so. That's quite interesting. But what does the Quran say about Jesus? Well, the Quran is, it's made up of 144 chapters or surahs, and what's very interesting is that Jesus, or Isa as he's called, is mentioned directly 25 times, but indirectly over 187 times, which makes him the most referenced person in the Quran. Bet you didn't know that. That's quite interesting. The Muslims believe that he had immaculate conception. In fact, they venerate Mary. Mary is the only woman that's mentioned by name in the Quran, and in fact, one of the chapters is chapter 19, is named Mary, after Mary, the mother of Jesus. So that's also interesting. They believe he had an immaculate conception, as the Christians do. They believe he was the Jewish Messiah, as the Christians do. That's interesting. The Jews don't, but the Muslims do. And they also believe that he will return and destroy the Antichrist. which is fascinating. And as I said earlier, he is the most referenced person in the New Testament. Mentioned directly 25 times, mentioned indirectly, like Mother of Mary, or whatever, as 187 times. So the three faiths are actually very closely linked. And it's sad that there's division and there's a conflict between the three faiths in the world, because I believe we are all very similar. There's the Muslims have a number. I don't know if you've seen it or know about it. It's 687. Now, what's interesting for me is that 6 is the number of Islam, because the Muslims worship and attend mosque on a Friday. 7 is the number of Judaism, because the Jews worship on the Sabbath, which is 7. And 8, you might not know this, is the number of Christianity, because we as Christians worship on the Sunday, which is actually the first day of the week, or the first day of the new week. So it's the 8th day. And also the 8 is the number of infinity, or eternity, is the symbol. So first there was the Jews, 7, and then came Christianity, 8, and then the Muslim faith came, 6. 7, 8, 6. So that's the three faiths put together in a nutshell, and I hope you found this interesting. I will now endeavor to lecture on Muslim mosques, now that you know a bit of the background of how the three faiths fit together.